it's about kind of the end bit of in the Parsha where Bilam gave, right, more of this Eitzah. He said, Ekayim shel Ele Sonei Zima. He says, listen, if you want to beat the Jews, Yah doesn't like immorality, right? Doesn't like forbidden relations when they do that. And they took the Benos Moav, they took these young ladies, and they got them to seduce Am Yisrael. Many different explanations. Also, in other words, how can you take Dora Midbar? Remember, we're dealing with, even now, so to speak, it's the next generation that's going into Eretz Yisrael. They had Moshe Rabbeinu as their Rebbe, right? They had Anani Kavod, they had all these things. And for the descriptions here, it seems like, they did the worst of the worst. Starting with the Znus, with the forbidden relations, going on to Avodah Zarah, the idolatry of Peor, which is going to be our topic, especially tonight. So the Medrash gives an interesting thing that all started because they wanted to buy wholesale. Right? In other words, it says that he told them, listen, first you got to set up a little flea market there with all sorts of clothing. Right? Have an older woman sitting out in front. And when the Jewish people come over to ask how much it costs, what's this merchandise like, say the good stuff that's on special sales in the back. And there would be a young woman, and then it would go downhill from there. Okay, now even this, I saw Rav Isaac Sher. Rav Isaac Sher, it was the son-in-law of Alter Sobotka. He goes to great lengths always to try to explain that every sin you see in these generations was something of dake dakus, right? It was something very thin. These people weren't, just lowlifes who were doing. Says, number one, it talks about also in the Medrash that they had special water from a well. There are wells that have certain powers. They had a well with aphrodisiac powers, so that when the Jews drank from it, they lost control somewhat. But he says, even the idea that they wanted to go and buy these nice clothing, he says, it's because just like when HaParsha Baruch Hu told them last week, if you're going to go through the land of Edom, tell them, listen, we're not looking for freebies. We're going to buy any food, we're going to buy it full price. We're going to buy water, we're going to buy it full price. That's to show it's an idea of Jewish pride. Hashem takes care of us. We are not schleppers coming through the desert. We got money, right? Look up to us. We are Chashuv people, we're Hashem's people. So that's why they went shopping. They weren't just going shopping stam to get some new threads, right, after having been bored with their clothing in the midbar. They wanted to show the Jewish people are here and they're well taken care of, right? But even that, you have to be careful of things going downhill. So let's try to take a look at where it went and how it went. Rav Chaim Shmuelevitz says the most puzzling thing is the description of Bnei Yisrael as Hanitzmodim lebal Peor, or Vayitzomed Yisrael lebal Peor. The word Lehitzamed means to be connected tightly, right? It talks about in the laws of Tum and Tahara, if you have a container and it has a tzamid patil alav, it has what's it called, the hermetic seal on it, right? Totally tight. So Am Yisrael became so tight to this Avodah Zarah. That's what's shocking. It's shocking, number one, that they could get that tight to any Avodah Zarah, meaning, according to the Medrash, where it says that they were overcome with their desire for these forbidden women, and the women said, wait a second, first we have to do a religious ceremony. But he said, even that wouldn't account for the description of Vayitzomed lebal Peor. That would be maybe they were Vayitzomed to the Znus, but not to the idolatry. That just would have been what you call a hechetimsik, just a means to the end. Yeah. But here, it was particularly to this. Now, out of all Avodah Zarahs, right, many Avodah Zarahs are very strange, okay? Now, but there's always rationale behind them. The Rambam explains, right, in the beginning of Hilchos Avodah Zarah, how Avodah Zarah evolved. How did it start from a world of Adam HaRishon and his descendants who knew about Hashem, and suddenly you're worshiping the God of this and the God of that? So he said they didn't originally deny the presence of Hashem as the ultimate creator, right? But just like you don't call the mayor of Yerushalayim if there's a power outage on your street, you call the guy in charge of the electric company. So Hashem set up structures of power here. You have the sun, you have the moon, you have the ocean, you have all sorts of things. And so you talk to the one that you need to get benefit from, right? And then eventually you stop even thinking about it. Who pays attention to the mayor so much? Am I ever going to talk to him? Am I ever going to do? I have who I need. but every one was set up with some type of reasoning, right? Like Maral says with the malachim that came to Avram Avinu, said he had to have him rachatzur aglechem, wash your feet, because he suspected that they were Arabs who worshipped the dust of their feet. So the Maral said, "What's that for religion? You worship the schmutz on your feet?" But he said, because the Bedouins, right, they lived by travel. Their whole way of life is, as the seasons change, they travel to this place and that place. They have incredible knowledge of the earth, of the sand. They said that they can sniff the sand and know all sorts of things of what's going on there. And that's why the army has Bedouin trackers, right? They track people particularly. So that was their idea, the thing that they worshipped. But Baal Peor was very different. Okay, the Gemara brings us a few stories. The idea of Peor means revealing, right? The pshat of the word Peor means to reveal. Okay, so what it would be is that they would eat and drink a lot, and then they would defecate before the idol. That was the Avodah Zarah. He says it's so hard for us to figure out why this would be attractive to anyone. The Gemara tells the following story. There was a certain non-Jewish woman. She was seriously ill. She made a neder. She said, if this woman, meaning myself, is going to be healed from her illness, I'm going to go on a tour and I'm going to worship every idol in the world. I'm going to worship every religion. Every god that's out there, I'm going to be doing its thing. So she started her tour. When she got to the Peor, so she came over to the priest. She said, okay, how do we serve it? Right? What do we do? So they said, this is what you do. You eat and drink, and then you publicly defecate in front of it. She said, Mutav shetazar, better that I should go back and be sick and not do such a thing. So if this non-Jewish woman, I couldn't bear the thought of it, how could Am Yisrael be so attached to it? Right? How could that be possible? Another interesting question he brings is that later, right, it connects the pasuk, right? It connects, it connects the idea of lo tosifun al hadavar asher anochi mitzaveh eschem. Right? It says in Devarim, don't add on to that which I command you. Lo sigru mimenu. Don't subtract from it. Right? It says, the Shmor's mitzvahs Hashem Elokechem asher anochi mitzaveh eschem. And then it goes on, Einechem haraos, your eyes saw, as Asher saw Hashem b'Baal Peor. What Hashem did to Baal Peor, everyone who went after the Baal Peor was destroyed. What does it have to do with subtracting or adding on mitzvahs to the Torah? Okay, where does that go? One last story of the Avodah of Baal Peor that Rav Chaim uses as a key to understanding. It says, Ma'aseh b'Savta ben Alas. Okay, there was this man called Savta ben Alas, and I just pull up the main story here, right? That it says he rented his donkey out to a certain non-Jewish woman, and then I guess he was also maybe driving the donkey. Kivan shegiya lePeor, she comes up to a temple of Peor. Amrullah amte najekana. She says, right, wait here, keep the meter running. I got to go and worship the Peor. Okay. Lachar sheyotza, when she came out, Amrullah afat amtini. Okay, you wait, I'm going to go have a try. Achekanes. Okay, so she said, V'lo Yehudi ata? Aren't you Jewish? He said, Ma'ich Batlach, what do you care that I'm Jewish? He went in, and he did what was done, but then he had a special hidur. It says, Kineach l'chotmo. He cleaned himself with the nose of the idol. And the Komrim, the priests of the Peor went, they said, never has anyone served the Peor like this before. Okay, this was what is so very strange, right? And this has halachic implications. What's fascinating is in Avodah Zarah, there's certain things which are called kind of universal avodas, and there are religion-specific avodas that are determined by the worshippers. Universal avodas, for example, is bowing down. If I would bow down to the Peor, even though that's not what they did, I would still be guilty of worshiping Avodah Zarah. Bowing down is a universal expression of worship. But when it comes to something else, right, so then they determine, for example, the Markulis was an idol that you would throw a rock at. So if I throw a rock at it, even if my intention is, stupid idol, and I throw a rock, so then at least B'shogeg, I've been guilty of worshiping that idol. They determine it. I'll just tell you, fascinatingly, right, Tereshkin's not here, Rav Soloveitchik pulled this out when he was asked a question about watching John F. Kennedy's funeral. Rav Hershel Schachter brings this down in his book. People asked him, can we watch JFK's funeral on the TV? Because he was the first Catholic president, and it was going to start with a big mass. So he said, no. He said, why? What's wrong watching it on TV? He said, because in Avodah Zarah, the idea is that the worshipers determine the form of worship. Why do they broadcast the church service on TV? Because they paskin that if you can't get to church, you can be yotzi by watching it on TV. So since they decide that you can be yotzi by watching, so you shouldn't watch. It's an interesting type of thing. Okay, so here, Rav Chaim says, let's get to the bottom of what this Avodah Zarah was like. He says clearly here that the Avodah Zarah was not just that you would do this action even though it's something which is shameful or like scorning the Avodah Zarah, but that was actually the Avodah itself, to be mavazeh, to set up a religion, to set up an idol, and then to treat it as disrespectfully as possible. He said that's exactly what it was about. And the more, what we learned from that story in the Gemara, is the more you can treat it disrespectfully, the better an Ovid you are. Now that's very strange. Rav Woodler says, right, why is it Chazal have this phrase, Kol Leitzanusa Asura, all Leitzanos, which is the negative type of joking, of making fun of things, it's all Asur, aside from Leitzanusa Avodah Zarah. Aside from the Leitzanos of Avodah Zarah. He says, but if the idea is that Leitzanos, which is the power to put something down through sarcasm and humor, why shouldn't it be for any negative thing? Right? For the Aveira of stealing, if you can use Leitzanos to put that down, why not? He said it's true. It's for all negative things. Why did they use the example of Avodah Zarah? He says because a person's religion is the most serious thing in his life. Okay, so therefore, something which is treated with such seriousness, that's where the weapon against it is the idea of Leitzanos. But here we're taking the religion, and they are, so to speak, making Leitzanah of their own religion more than we could have thought of ourselves. What type of thing is that? So he explains the following. He says the idea of the Baal Peor is no limits, no limitations, no geder, no fences, no boundaries, total freedom. Whatever you want, you can do. No cultural norms, no shame in front of this one or that one. Anything you feel like doing, do it. Where you want, when you want. Okay? Therefore, the very idea of we're going to set up a religion, but the way we worship it is by doing the most disgusting things in the world that nobody would ever do in their religious temple, that's going to be it. Because it's a celebration of human free will. It's a celebration of the power of man and the greatness of man. Nobody tells me what to do and what not to do. I do what I want when I want. He said that has the power to draw people very strongly. He says, Muvan eitev koach mashicha shel avodah zarah zu. He says, we can understand well now the draw of this avodah zarah. Inyanahu shakol hefker la'ad. The idea is that everything is open. Everything's free. Everything is what you decide. There are no fences. There's nothing there. And he said, even though the Anshe Knesset Zadola were mevatel, the Yetzirah for avodah zarah, this type of avodah zarah, this type of Peor urge exists in our time. He was writing like in the 60s. He said, and it's conquering, right, the hearts of the young people. Okay, now again, there were some negative things that were broken down during the 60s. And it was good it was broken down. People started to question racism that was institutionalized and other things like that. So they broke some bad things, but they also broke some good things. You could question everything. Like, why should I wear clothes? It's warm out today. Who says I have to wear clothes, right? What'd you call your father? Dad? He's got a name. His name's John. Call him John, right? Why do you get dressed up when you go to this place or that place? Everything we questioned, this idea of freedom, of doing it. It wasn't just destructiveness. It was supposed to be free yourself from the bonds of control of all these types of things. Okay, now we look at these things differently. Okay, the idea of not removing one mitzvah of the Torah or not adding on one mitzvah to the Torah means tampering with a structure. A gather, a boundary, creates structure. And structure is very important for existence. Baron Lopiansky, Shlita, the Rosh Hashiva in Silver Spring, I heard a talk of his, and he said that he was reading a book by a biologist. And he specialized in the biology of the cell. And he said once he was at some kind of gathering, and people were asking, what is the most important component of the cell? So there's all these different little parts in the cell, the mitochondria, this, that. He said, it's the cell wall. Every cell has a wall that contains it and makes it a separate entity, this membrane, whatever it is. Without the wall, the cell is totally gone. It totally falls apart. So that is the most important component. Then, within the space, so to speak, the entity contained by the wall, everything can work. So this is what's happening here, is the breaking down of all walls. On one hand, it's a very heady feeling, this feeling of liberation. I can do anything. I can do anything I want. Just because I haven't done this before, just because people don't do this, but I can. Why not? He says, and again, sometimes that can be good. I heard a fascinating lecture. I think I just saw a summary of it. Some Israeli professor spoke about the positive sides of chutzpah. Right? In other words, he said Israelis, especially Jews, are known for chutzpah. Israelis are known for chutzpah. He said in science and high tech, that served well for Israelis. Because anytime someone says, no, this can't be done, you can't make a solar battery that'll last that long. Oh, yeah? Right? Says who? Right? And they'll go and they'll try to make it. So this leads that idea of the chutzpah is a positive thing. But, right, the chutzpah that breaks down all barriers is self-destructive, right? If you do that, you destroy yourself in different ways. How do we see that? So, this is the famous Gemara Maseches Gittin about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And it says that Titus came into the Kodesh Kadoshim and did disgusting things there, and then he took his sword and he stuck it into the parochos. And miraculously, through it, his blood started to come from the parochos. And they say, Savar Shaharagis Atzmo, which is a euphemism for him thinking that he killed the one above. And this, right, the Mefarshim say, is part of Am Yisrael's punishment, that their enemy was able to exult like that. Not only did he go into the Kodesh Kadoshim and do terrible things and nothing happened to him, but even this miracle came. He stabs the parochos and blood comes out. But the Maharal explains that there was a message in that for Am Yisrael. You have to understand what you had and what you were losing. The Beis HaMikdash is all about structure. The Beis HaMikdash is all about mechitzas, all about separations and divisions. Yisraelim can come here, Levim can come here, Kohanim can come here, the Kohen Gadol can come here. You can come in here if you're tummy, you can't come in here if you're tummy. All these different restrictions and these things, but that enabled us to connect. That enabled us to connect to the Kedusha. When you take away all those restrictions, there's nothing there. You can go up, but then you can't connect anymore to that Kedusha in this world. Structure contains, structure makes things accessible. It doesn't just make things inaccessible. So that was the thing. In the body, when the body's together, the blood is not flowing out of it. The blood is where it's supposed to be. And it's bringing life and connecting all the different systems in your body. When something's bleeding, it's true, you freed it up. The blood is no longer limited to those blood vessels, but that's not a good thing. Right? That is limiting and cutting down your functionality. So this is the idea of valuing the mechitzas that are there. I heard a fascinating shir once from Moshe Peor Zatzal. I used to go to a shir on Friday, and it was in Beit Vegan, And one year there was a heavy snowstorm. So very few people were able to come to the shir. I was living nearby at the time, and I came. So it was just a handful of us in Ramusha. So he decided he'll give a shir about snow. Right? And interesting things about snow. One thing he pointed out is that the word sheleg is all of the threes. Gimel, which is 3, Lamed, which is 30, Shin, which is 300. Why? He says there's a pasuk in Eov, right, which says, Ki la sheleg yomar heve aretz. Okay, the Gemara asks, right, where was the world created from? So it says, Hashem took, in the Medrash, Beishis Rabbah, Hashem took snow, mitachas the kisei hakavod, and he told it, you become the aretz. The world is a big snowball, right? It comes from snow. Why snow? So explain the following. 3 represents the stage in between, if we have these famous 3 midos, chesed, gevura, and tiferes, which is also the midah of rachamim, but it's also the midah of kavod, of honor. How does that work? Chesed is represented by water. Water flows. Water goes where it wants to go. Gevura is like ice. There's an expression in Makera Hanura. It stays in place. It doesn't go anywhere. He says the idea of a covered relationship to something is, on one hand, I'm drawn to you. On the other hand, I know that I have to maintain a certain structure in order to interact with you. Yeah. So that is, he said, exactly what in the way it's supposed to be in terms of that connection. Well. So when we come, right, to Shivasa 2 out of 3, 2 out of 3. The Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes, he says, you have water in your eyes. Oh, so the snow, on one hand, is a form of water. It's malleable. It's not hard like ice, but it doesn't flow like the water. So if you imagine, he said, your relationship with a big person, you come and you see a gadol tzaddik. On one hand, you would want to go and embrace him, and is it on the other hand, right? You're kind of frightened and staying away, but then you're going to be too far away. You need that snow type of relationship, which is in the middle. It's malleable, it's flexible, it's not a solid piece of ice, but it's not flowing, right, without any containment like the water. So we come to Shivasa B'Tammuz, right, an idea of hufka ha'ir, right, the idea of the wall of the city being broken. The question you find in Sfarim already from Asar B'Teves is, why should you make a fast day on Asar B'Teves if it continued on into the big tragedy of the Churban? Make a fast day on the Churban, right? In other words, if you're a big baseball fan, right, so you don't make a day of mourning when your team lost the first game of the World Series. The second game, at the end, when they finally lose the World Series, then you can cry, right? So why are you doing it on these intermediate stages? So they explain that each of those stages we're supposed to realize was a churban in and of itself. Asar B'Teves means that the city was put under siege. That means it's true. The city had a wall, but the wall wasn't controlled by us. What went in and out of the city was controlled by those around us, by the Bavlim surrounding us. Shivasa B'Tammuz, Ufkoya, the wall was broken. When the wall is broken, that means that you can't be yourself anymore. That you don't have that ability to control what comes in and what comes out. That in itself is a churban that a person is supposed to see and recognize. Okay, so this is an idea of structure. On the other hand, you have to be careful, because this same desire, Rav Chaim says, you have to look at this as an example of how a positive idea can come of negative. What's the idea behind that Baal Peor, behind this, I should be able to do anything? It says it's really what people call gadlus adam, the greatness of man. Man is so great, man is so elokim, man is so powerful, and it's very important for us to realize that in order to do what we have to do. But if it becomes subverted, then you think, okay, well, I should be able to do anything I want then. Right? You have to be very careful with that. So you have that urge, which is very powerful. On the other hand, Rav Wolbe's whole approach in working on yourself in his books of Musar is you must not set off what he calls Tguvat HaMered, the rebellion reflex. says that we have to be real with ourselves. If we get cramped down too tight, we automatically fight against it. There's something in our nature which is not meant to be controlled and imprisoned that much. So obviously the halacha, everything which is halacha. But especially when it comes to the idea of trying to take on other things, trying to progress in different ways, the only things you should do are very tiny little things that you barely feel. Because if you put something heavy on yourself, you're going to kick. And if you kick back with that rebellion reflex, you can end up much further away than where you started. Okay, so that's a very interesting balance. On one hand, yes, structure. On one hand, the wall that enables us to be ourselves. But don't add on more walls and restrictions to yourself than are appropriate for you at the time. Okay? If you do that, so then the reaction afterwards could be very great. Right? It tells the story of Job in one of his books on education about a father who came to complain to him about how his kids or teenagers, they didn't want to talk to him, they didn't want to have anything to do with him. And he said, you shouldn't think I was one of these fathers who didn't, invest in the chinuch of his kids. They would come to shul every Shabbos and they would sit next to me for the whole davening. And if they would talk or they would miss an amen, they would feel it. So he says, here's your answer. Right? Meaning, at the time when they were subservient to you and you were bigger and stronger than them, so they had to do that. But it set off that rebellion reflex, and eventually when they were able to get away from you, they're gone. Okay, so that's the other side of it. Yes, the world of restrictions which create positive walls for a healthy Jewish life, but not adding on things that it's very important to know the individual, to know who and what is appropriate for a person to add on and what time, so it doesn't set off that rebellion, which again can be negative. That's the tightrope we have to walk in. It was just